A decorated black veteran survives war overseas, only to face his greatest battle at home. When Zane Mitchell stops for gas after his evening run, he has no idea that his entire life is about to be destroyed. Targeted by corrupt officers in Granite Hills, he is beaten, framed, and thrown behind bars, all because of a system designed to silence men like him. But these officers made one fatal mistake. They thought Zane had no one to fight for him. As his fearless sister, Talia Mitchell, exposes the truth, the case explodes nationwide, forcing the Pentagon and the FBI to take action. But when the corrupt police captain tries to eliminate Zane for good, the system he built collapses around him. This is a story of courage, justice, and the downfall of corruption. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more powerful stories. The cool evening air in Granite Hills carried the faint scent of autumn as Zane Mitchell ran along his usual route, his boots hitting the pavement in steady rhythm. The disciplined breathing, the focused movements, it all reminded him of his military days, keeping him sharp and present. Titan, his loyal German shepherd, matched his pace effortlessly, his ears perked, always alert. Zane had lived in Granite Hills for 3 years now, returning to civilian life after 12 years of service in the Marines. He had seen combat-led teams made life or death decisions in deserts far away. But in many ways, adjusting to life back home had proven just as difficult as the war zones he had left behind. The streets of Granite Hills, once familiar, now felt hostile, especially for a man like him. A police cruiser idled at the far end of the street, barely visible in the dimming light. Zane noticed it but kept running. Then, another lap. The cruiser was still there. On his third pass, it slowly rolled forward, creeping along the curb, matching his pace. Titan let out a low, warning growl. "Easy, buddy," Zane murmured, though his instincts screamed otherwise. This wasn't the first time he had seen Granite Hills PD act like this. He had heard the whispers at the local veterans center, stories of veterans, particularly those who looked like him, getting harassed. His credentials meant little to men who already saw him as a threat simply because of his height, build, and skin color. But he wasn't going to start anything. Not tonight. As he approached Grant's Gas and Go, he decided to stop for water and refuel his car. Titan obediently sat outside the entrance as Zane headed toward the pumps. He barely had time to swipe his card before he heard raised voices. Near the entrance of the gas station, 2 officers, one large and broad-shouldered, the other wiry and mean-faced, had cornered a black teenager against the wall. The kid, no older than 16, stood frozen in place, his hands slightly raised, his Letterman jacket too clean, too new for their liking. "Where'd you steal that, huh?" the broad-shouldered officer sneered. "I didn't steal anything." "My mom." "I didn't ask about your mom," the wiry officer snapped, stepping closer, his hand resting on the baton at his belt. Zane's jaw tightened as he took in the scene. It was a power play, a game of intimidation. They wanted a reaction, an excuse to escalate things. Titan, sensing his unease, whined softly. "Not my fight," Zane told himself. "Not right now." He turned back to the pump, keeping the scene in his peripheral vision. The officers weren't wearing body cams, intentional, no doubt. No record, no proof. The teen looked terrified. His hands trembled slightly. Zane's instincts screamed at him to step in, to stop this. But experience had taught him differently. Years of military strategy told him that charging in without a plan never ended well. And in Granite Hills, challenging Captain Victor Langley's officers meant painting a target on your own back. So he did the only thing he could. He memorized their badge numbers. Then, as quietly as he had arrived, Zane finished refueling, called Titan to his side, and drove away, still gripping the wheel too tightly. Zane had barely gone 3 blocks before he saw the flashing red and blue lights in his mirror. Damn it. He had been expecting this. Titan let out a low growl from the back seat. "Stay," Zane commanded, pulling over smoothly, keeping his hands visible on the wheel. The cruiser's door opened and Captain Victor Langley stepped out, his polished boots crunching on the pavement. Zane had only seen him once before, at a veterans fundraising event where the man had shaken hands and smiled for photos while his officers harassed people like Zane outside the venue. Tonight, that smugness was gone. Instead, there was only power-drunk authority. Next to him, Officer Lucas Cade, younger and eager to prove himself, rested a hand on his holster. Langley leaned down to Zane's window, shining a too-bright flashlight directly into his face. "License and registration," he said without preamble. Zane, moving deliberately, retrieved his wallet. "Mind telling me why I'm being pulled over, Captain?" he asked evenly. Langley ignored the question, flipping through Zane's ID as if expecting to find something wrong. His eyes lingered on Zane's military veteran card. "A Marine, huh?" Langley mused. "That's supposed to impress me." Zane remained silent. Langley let the words hang before stepping back. This vehicle was seen circling suspiciously around a high-theft area. Zane fought back a bitter laugh. "You mean my running route?" Cade smirked. Langley didn't. "Step out of the vehicle." Zane knew where this was going. Still, he followed protocol, moving slowly, hands visible. The moment his feet hit the pavement, Cade grabbed him, slamming him against the hood of his car. Titan barked wildly from the backseat, claws scratching against the glass. "Resisting," Langley taunted. "Tusk, tusk. Thought a soldier like you would know how to follow orders." Then the first punch landed, a sharp jab to his ribs enough to steal his breath. The second hit sent him sprawling onto the pavement. His dog tag snapped free, scattering onto the ground. Titan's barks turned frantic, the sound of a desperate animal ready to defend its master. "That dog of yours looks aggressive," Cade noted, stepping toward the vehicle. Zane, dazed but furious, tried to move, but Langley pressed a knee into his back. "Maybe we should take him to animal control. Might not make it through the night." Zane went still. That was a threat, not just against him, but against Titan. Langley smiled, satisfied. "You're under arrest for resisting and, hell, let's say suspicion of stolen goods. We'll find something later." Zane clenched his jaw but said nothing. He had faced worse than this before, but the war he thought he had left behind had just followed him home. Zane Mitchell sat on the cold metal bench in the Granite Hills Police Department, his wrists throbbing from the too tight handcuffs that had only just been removed. The fluorescent lighting above buzzed like an angry swarm, casting an unnatural glow over the sterile, soulless room. The air smelled of sweat, old coffee, and something metallic: blood. His blood. The booking officer, a bored-looking sergeant with a gut that strained against his uniform, barely glanced at Zane before muttering, "Name." Zane kept his voice even. "Zane Mitchell." The sergeant tapped at the keyboard with deliberate slowness, acting as though every keystroke was a personal favor. "Charges." Officer Lucas Cade, standing nearby with a smirk still stretched across his face, tossed a folder onto the desk. "Resisting arrest," Cade said casually. "Suspicion of possession of stolen goods." Zane's jaw clenched. It was a blatant lie. He had nothing stolen in his vehicle, but that didn't matter. These men could make evidence appear and disappear as easily as breathing. The sergeant barely glanced at the folder before stamping a paper and shoving it into a stack. Routine. Just another day in the Granite Hills system. Zane was ordered to stand for his mugshot. The camera flashed, momentarily blinding him, and for the first time since this nightmare started, he felt a familiar, sickening feeling in his gut. This wasn't just an arrest. This was an erasure. A slow, deliberate process to turn Zane Mitchell, decorated Marine, into Zane Mitchell, criminal. As they fingerprinted him, pressing his bruised fingers hard onto the ink pad, Zane fought against the deep rage that simmered in his chest. He had been trained to endure, to resist, to fight in enemy territory. But he never thought he'd need that training against his own countrymen. The door clanked shut behind him, and Zane took in his new surroundings. The cell reeked of sweat, old urine, and despair. The walls were lined with men who looked like they had been here too long, their expressions blank with either exhaustion or resignation. From the far side of the cell, a gravelly voice spoke. "You're new." Zane turned toward the speaker, a thin, older black man with weary eyes and a Marine Corps tattoo fading on his forearm. The man gave a half smile. "I know that look. You're wondering how the hell you ended up here." Zane sat slowly, his body aching from the earlier beating. "I have a pretty good idea." The older man chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "Name's Luther Hayes," he nodded toward Zane's hands. "You're military." "Yeah, thought so," Luther muttered. "Granite Hills doesn't like men like us, black men who know how to fight. They see us as threats, not citizens." Zane nodded slowly. He had suspected as much. Luther leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "This place doesn't play fair. They plant evidence, make charges stick, make people disappear." Zane narrowed his eyes. "Disappear?" Luther's face darkened. "You ever hear about Malik Thompson?" Zane shook his head. "That's because you weren't supposed to," Luther said bitterly. "Another vet, got stopped for reckless driving, had a clean record just like you, except he never made it out." Zane felt a chill roll down his spine. How many others had Langley and his men silenced? Before he could ask more, the cell door swung open. "Mitchell," a guard barked. "You've got a visitor." Talia Mitchell's hands clenched into fists as she stared at the officer blocking her path. "My brother was arrested hours ago, and you still haven't let him make a phone call," she snapped. The desk sergeant, a thick-necked man with dead eyes, barely looked up from his paperwork. "He's unavailable." Talia resisted the urge to slam her hands on the counter. She knew this game. They were stonewalling, trying to keep Zane isolated long enough to make him disappear into the system, not on her watch. She pulled out her phone, recording the interaction. "Are you saying that you're denying a U.S. citizen his right to legal counsel and a phone call?" she asked, her voice sharp. The sergeant's lips twitched, but he remained silent. "Because I have media contacts, a lawyer on speed dial, and a direct line to a certain Pentagon official who would love to hear why a decorated Marine is being held without due process." That got his attention. His eyes flickered with something, annoyance, maybe even worry. Talia didn't stop. She pressed harder. "You think this will stay quiet? You think I won't make noise?" She stepped closer, voice low and dangerous. "Try me." A long pause. Then, "Wait here." Officer Riley Novick sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen, the report on Zane Mitchell's arrest open before her. Something wasn't right. She clicked through the files, but where was the body cam footage? Her pulse quickened. She had seen Langley and Cade bring Mitchell in, bloodied and barely conscious. Now, all footage from that night was missing. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She knew the rules. Stay quiet. Don't ask questions. Don't challenge Langley. But something about this felt worse than usual. Novick glanced around before plugging in a flash drive. She copied the report, then typed a single message in an encrypted email. "Something is wrong, no footage, need to talk." Then she hit send. Zane sat across from Captain Langley, his hands cuffed to the metal table. Langley studied him, his expression unreadable. "You know," he began, "I have a lot of respect for men in uniform. Hell, I donate to veteran causes every year." Zane remained silent. Langley smirked. "Here's the deal, Marine," he continued. You plead guilty to resisting arrest, take the reduced sentence, and walk away. Do your time, don't make waves, and this all disappears. Zane narrowed his eyes. And if I don't, Langley's smile vanished. Then you'll rot here until you break. He leaned forward, or until an unfortunate accident happens. Zane's chest burned with fury, but he forced his face to remain neutral. I'm not signing a damn thing. Langley exhaled sharply, as if annoyed that Zane wasn't being more reasonable. Fine. He motioned toward the door. A moment later, Officer Cade stepped inside. Before Zane could brace himself, the first punch slammed into his ribs. He gritted his teeth, refusing to make a sound. The second blow split his lip. Welcome to Granite Hills, soldier, Langley said, standing up. Let's see how long you last. As the door slammed shut behind them, Zane spat blood onto the floor. This wasn't over. Not even close. Talia Mitchell sat at her cluttered desk, her fingers flying across the keyboard, her mind racing against the ticking clock. The harsh glow of her laptop screen illuminated her determined face. The words she typed were not just another story, they were a weapon. Decorated Marine framed by corrupt cops, Granite Hills PD's war against veterans. Her sources were airtight. The abuse her brother had suffered was just one of many. She had names, reports, even testimonies from other veterans who had been targeted by Captain Langley's department. Her article exposed Granite Hills PD's long history of harassment and false arrests, especially against veterans. Men who had served their country, only to return home and be treated like criminals. She uploaded the last pieces of evidence and attached an image of Zane's swollen, bruised face from his mugshot. Then, she hit publish. Within minutes, her phone exploded with notifications. Her article was being shared, commented on, debated. National journalists picked it up, retweeting and quoting her work. Activists called for federal intervention. Then, she received a text from an unknown number. Mitchell, we need to talk. See, Riggs. Talia's heart leaped. Colonel Samuel Riggs, Zane's former commanding officer. She didn't waste a second. She dialed the number. Riggs answered on the first ring. Tell me everything. Colonel Samuel Riggs stood in his D.C. office, jaw tight as he scanned Talia's article. He had known Zane Mitchell for years. He had seen him lead missions under fire, save men when hope seemed lost. And now a corrupt precinct was trying to erase him. Not on his watch. He grabbed his phone and dialed a secure line. This is Colonel Riggs, he said firmly. Get me the Pentagon legal team and a liaison at the FBI. We have a situation in Granite Hills. Officer Riley Novick sat at her desk, staring at the blank screen of her computer. The files were gone. Every single record of Zane's arrest, body cam footage, station logs, all erased. She had seen Langley do shady things before, but this was different. This wasn't just covering up excessive force. This was burying a man alive. Her hand shook as she reached for her phone. She had to do something. She glanced around the precinct before standing, walking as casually as she could toward Langley's office. The door was slightly ajar, and what she heard inside made her blood run cold. Inside Langley's office, Captain Langley and Officer Lucas Cade stood over a desk littered with documents. We need to handle this, and fast, Langley muttered. The article is gaining traction, Cade said, pacing. People are already asking questions. What if the feds come knocking? Langley scoffed. They won't. Not if we shut this down now. Novick held her breath as she pressed record on her phone. Langley's voice was cold, calculating. We can't afford for Mitchell to be sitting in that holding cell when the FBI comes sniffing around. He's got military ties, and now his sister is making too much noise. Cade nodded grimly. So what's the move? Langley leaned back in his chair, a sinister smirk playing on his lips. We process a late-night transfer, have him taken to a facility upstate. He paused. Except, he never makes it. Cade whistled low. A suicide, Langley shrugged. A vet with PTSD who'd be surprised. Novick felt her stomach churn. They weren't just framing Zane. They were planning to kill him. She needed to act. Now. Novick backed away from Langley's office, heart pounding. She typed a quick message on a burner email account. They're moving Zane tonight. He won't make it out alive. Do something. She hit send and sent it directly to Talia Mitchell. Then she made a choice that would change her life forever. She walked back to her desk, grabbed a USB drive and started copying everything she could. She knew that if Langley caught her, she would be next. Zane was half asleep on the cold bench when the door slammed open. 2 officers marched in. "Mitchell, you're being transferred." Zane's instincts flared. Something was wrong, no paperwork, no explanation, just 2 men with hard expressions. Titan's absence gnawed at him. His dog had been taken hours ago, but now he wondered, had they killed him already? His blood boiled, but he forced himself to stay calm. They shoved him toward the exit, his hands still cuffed behind his back. Outside, a dark van idled near the alley. No markings, no official transport. Zane stiffened. He had seen this before. Not in America, but overseas, black sites, off-the-books operations. They weren't taking him to another jail. They were taking him to die. Talia's phone buzzed at 100 a.m. A message from an unknown sender. "They're moving Zane tonight. He won't make it out alive. Do something." She shot up from her bed, panic surging through her veins. She dialed Colonel Riggs. "It's happening," she whispered. "They're moving him now." Riggs didn't hesitate. "I'll call the FBI." Talia grabbed her keys, racing to the police station. She had one thought in her mind: don't let them take him. Novick's heart was hammering as she watched Cade and the 2 officers escort Zane toward the unmarked van. She had seconds to decide. Then she made her move. She stepped in front of them, blocking the van door. Cade glared at her. "Move, Novick." Her hand hovered over her radio. "You don't have official transfer papers," she said coolly. "This isn't protocol." Langley stepped out of the precinct, his expression livid. "Novick," he growled, "you are making a career-ending mistake." She stood her ground. "You'll have to go through me." Langley's eyes burned with fury. Before he could answer, red and blue lights flooded the alleyway. FBI vehicles skidded to a stop. Novick exhaled sharply. She had done it. FBI agents stormed out of their vehicles, weapons raised. "Granite Hills PD, stand down." Langley's face drained of color. Cade took a step back, his hand twitching toward his holster. A voice boomed through a megaphone. "Captain Victor Langley, you are under investigation for civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy to commit murder." Zane, still cuffed, allowed himself a small, painful smirk. This wasn't over, but now the fight had finally begun. Officer Riley Novick sat at her desk, staring at the USB drive she had just finished copying. The files on it, dozens of erased body cam videos, false reports, and evidence tampering logs, were enough to bury Captain Langley forever. She had been playing a dangerous game, pretending to go along with the precinct's corruption while gathering everything she could. Tonight, she was done pretending. Taking a deep breath, she slid the USB drive into her jacket pocket and stood. Langley had already ordered Zane's disappearance once. If she didn't act now, he'd try again, and this time Zane wouldn't make it out alive. She grabbed her phone and sent a single message to Talia Mitchell. "I have proof. Meet me at the warehouse on 5th in 20 minutes. Then she took her gun, tucked it under her belt, and walked out of the precinct. For the first time in her career, she wasn't following orders. Talia paced the dimly lit warehouse, her heart pounding. When Novick finally arrived, she didn't waste time. "This is everything," Novick said, handing over the USB drive. "Body cam footage, deleted reports, proof they've been planting evidence for years." Talia's hands shook as she held the drive. If this is real, Langley's finished. Novik met her gaze. It's real. Without another word, Talia plugged the drive into her laptop and began uploading the files to a secure cloud server. Within minutes, she sent everything to her media contacts. At 3:14 a.m., the first national news alert broke. Breaking news. FBI investigating corrupt Granite Hills Police Department after new evidence surfaces. Talia watched as news stations began airing leaked footage. Videos of innocent black men and veterans being falsely arrested, beaten, framed. Langley's crimes were no longer secrets hidden in case files. They were national headlines. Captain Victor Langley was seething. The news was everywhere. The FBI was coming. He slammed his fist against his desk, glaring at Officer Lucas Cade, his most loyal enforcer. "We need to end this, now," Cade nodded. "Mitchell's still in holding. We could," Langley cut him off. "No, the FBI will be here soon. We need him gone before they arrive." Cade hesitated. "The last transfer attempt failed. Novik stopped us." Langley's eyes darkened. "Then this time we do it ourselves." The sound of the cell door unlocking snapped Zane awake. 2 officers entered. "Time to go, Mitchell." Zane sat up slowly, his ribs aching from the last beating. "Another late-night transfer," he said, voice dry. "Let me guess, wrong cell, wrong paperwork, wrong place at the wrong time," Cade smirked. "Something like that." They yanked him up and dragged him down the back exit, shoving him into a dark police van. The doors slammed shut. The van started moving. Zane took stock. Hands cuffed in front, not behind. Cade was driving. 1 other officer was in the passenger seat. No cameras. This wasn't a transfer. This was an execution. His military instincts kicked in. He waited. 1, 2, 3. Then he struck. He drove his elbow into Cade's throat, sending the van swerving wildly. The officer in the passenger seat shouted, reaching for his gun. But Zane was faster. With a single sharp kick, he sent the weapon flying before headbutting the officer, knocking him unconscious. Cade regained control of the van, but Zane was already on him. The 2 men struggled in the cramped space, exchanging brutal blows. Cade managed to pull his gun, but Zane grabbed his wrist, twisting hard. The gun fired, shattering the windshield. The van veered off the road, crashing into a ditch. The impact sent them both flying. For a moment there was silence. Then Zane crawled out, bloodied, breath ragged but alive. He turned toward the wrecked van. Cade groaned, trying to reach for his radio. Zane stepped forward and kicked it out of his hand. Cade looked up at him, fear in his eyes. Zane clenched his fists. "You lose." Then sirens filled the air.